The lawyer spoke my name into the damp chill of the office at St. Anne's, and the entire trajectory of my existence snapped onto a new track. Nora isn't the legal beneficiary, Mr. Caldwell clarified, nudging his wire rims up his nose as he studied the brittle yellowed documents in his grip. However, Mrs. Ida Mae Colton was explicit in her final requests. Nora must go with Josie to Montana. Her reasoning, and I'm reading this verbatim, they are each other's true family. I glanced at Josie. She was 16, 3 years my junior, and silent tears were already starting to flow. This wasn't the noisy, reactive sobbing of a kid with a scraped knee. It was something quieter originating from a much deeper well of pain. The tracks on her face looked like they'd been waiting a lifetime to surface. Someone had just used the word family to describe us. A stranger, a woman who had passed away 6 months prior in a Montana farmhouse 1,000 miles from this dreary Ohio institution where we'd spent years waiting for a rescue that never arrived. I reached across the gap between our chairs and found Josie's hand. Her fingers were ice cold. I squeezed them tight, a reflex honed by 1,000 scary nights before this one. Just like that first night she landed at St. Anne's. 8 years old, shaking like a leaf, her parents freshly gone in a highway wreck in the rain. I was 11 back then, old enough to realize no white knight was coming for us. Old enough to know the world has no special mercy for orphans, but young enough to believe we could be each other's salvation. And we were. For 8 years, we were everything. I don't get it. Josie whispered, her voice a fragile ghost of a sound. My grandmother. I never knew I had one. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat gently. He was around 60, with soft eyes that had witnessed too many abandoned kids and too much heartbreak. She was your mother's mother, he said softly. Ida Mae Colton. She kept a home in a town called Copper Ridge way up in the Montana mountains. She died last September. Why didn't she ever... Josie trailed off the question, too heavy to finish. There is a letter, Mr. Caldwell interjected. He dipped into his battered leather satchel and pulled out an envelope, worn, stained with age, addressed to My Josie, in a trembling script. He set it on the table between us with the reverence of a priest handling a holy relic. She wanted you to hear this from her. Josie looked at the paper like it was a live grenade. I totally got it. For 8 years, she'd built her reality on the fact that she was alone, that the crash had severed her from the human race. And now in this drafty room with spring rain weeping against the glass, she was finding out she hadn't been invisible after all. Someone out there had loved her. Someone had looked for her. Someone had failed, but they had tried. Take a minute, Mr. Caldwell said kindly. I'll give you girls some space. He rose and moved to the window, turning his back to offer us a shred of privacy. Beyond the glass, the gray Ohio sky bore down on the orphanage, a heavy, suffocating blanket. I'd lived under that gloom for 19 years. In 3 days, I was scheduled to age out of St. Anne's. I'd been paralyzed by fear, not of fending for myself, but of leaving Josie unprotected. Now, out of nowhere, the universe was handing us a lifeline. Josie's hand shook as she reached for the envelope. She worked a finger under the flap and pulled out thin, crinkled pages filled with that same shaky cursive. I leaned in, our shoulders touching, and we started to read together. My dearest Josie, the text started. If you are holding this, I have already passed on. And my attorney has finally located you. I've been hunting for you for 8 years, my sweet girl. 8 years of letters bouncing back from addresses that didn't exist. 8 years of calling government offices that wouldn't give me the time of day. 8 years of begging God every night that you were safe and cherished somewhere. I am your grandmother. Your mother... I paused, imagining the landscape she described. It sounds dry, I whispered. Yeah, Josie breathed. And not cold, not like out there. The earth is solid, I murmured. Think we can stay. I think we can build, she said. Build what? A sanctuary. A place that won't kick us out. We looked back at the letter. Mother's mother. Your mom was my only baby. Losing her was the sharpest grief I've ever endured. The truly unbearable part was realizing you were out there navigating the world in isolation, and I was powerless to bring you home. It left a scar that time simply refused to fade. I turned over every stone Josie. I brought in attorneys and bombarded the state agencies with inquiries. I even made the trip to Ohio twice, but the red tape was a tangled mess and I was old sick and didn't know how to fight them. By the time I figured out the system my body gave out, I couldn't make the trip anymore. But I never stopped loving you. Not for a single second. I'm leaving you everything I possess. It isn't a fortune. 47 acres of high country, a little cabin that needs work, and whatever cash is left in the tin. But it belongs to you, Josie. It's your birthright. It's a home if you're willing to take it. There is one more thing I have to say. This is vital. On this eastern edge of the land, there is a cavern. There is a cavern on the property, spacious, arid, and receding deep into the stone. Its mouth faces southeast, catching the first warmth of dawn. I have spent years analyzing its structure. I am convinced it could shelter a family through the most brutal winter. The ancients, the indigenous tribes who walked this land ages ago, understood the value of dwelling within the earth itself. Stone retains warmth. It deflects the gale. It offers sanctuary. My lifelong wish was to construct a true residence within that hollow, a permanent structure, a fortress to keep my kin secure. But age and frailty caught up with me, and I was too solitary for such a task. Perhaps you can succeed where I failed. And, Josie, listen closely. My attorney informs me you have a companion, a young woman named Nora, who has stood by your side since you entered St. Anne's. She has been your shield, your caretaker, and your sister in spirit. Take her with you. That bond makes her family regardless of lineage. Affection born of free will runs deeper than genetics ever could. I have added her name to my final bequests. Whatever is yours is hers. If she has cherished my granddaughter for 8 years, she has earned my devotion as well. My only regret is never meeting you two. I wanted to hold you to tell you that you were necessary, that you were adored, that you had a place in this world. Since that is impossible, I bequeath you this acreage, this shelter, this opportunity. Create something beautiful, my dear one. Build a haven infused with my love forever and always. Your grandmother, Ida May. By the time we finished reading, Josie had collapsed into tears, her frame racking with heavy, silent tremors. I pulled her close, holding on for dear life as my own vision blurred. I couldn't hold it back. For 8 years, we believed we were solitary in this universe. For 8 years, we survived that gray facility on nothing but grit and mutual reliance. Suddenly, we discovered an unseen presence had been watching over us all along, a stranger who actually cared. She understood the nature of our bond. She called it family. Mr. Caldwell turned from the glass, his eyes shimmering with uncharacteristic emotion. "There is more," he said softly. "Mrs. Colton left specific directives. She urged you to depart immediately before—" He paused. "Before what?" I pressed. "Before the system intervenes. Nora, you turn 19 in 3 days. Once that date hits, you lose your right to stay, and the state takes full custody of Josie. If you are going to do this, you must flee together right now." I glanced at Josie. She met my gaze. We didn't need to speak to know the answer. Montana was the destination. If you are reading this, tell me something. Has a stranger ever validated a bond that wasn't biological? Share your experience below. Your story might be the spark someone else needs. 3 days later, we were on an interstate coach out of Columbus, Ohio, our lives packed into 2 duffel bags. Our inventory was sparse, mostly thrift store garments. Josie saved a few novels, Ida May's letter clutched to her chest like a holy relic, and $127. That was our total fortune scraped together from scraps of work and rare moments of generosity over the years. The interior of the coach reeked of diesel fumes and old tobacco. I sat on split vinyl, the pane beside me clouded with the oils of 100 strangers' hands. Yet, as the station faded and Ohio receded into the distance, a sensation I'd long forgotten took root. Hope. It felt brittle, delicate as early frost. I barely dared to examine it, terrified it might vanish like every other fantasy we'd held. Still, it glowed steadily within my chest, and I clung to it with desperation. The transit took 48 hours. We transferred in Chicago, then Billings, and finally Helena. Rest came in upright snatches, our skulls resting together, fingers locked tight. Our meals were stale vending machine fare, washed down with water from fountains that tasted of iron. Then, in the desolate stretch of Wyoming, a stray found us. We had pulled into a tiny stop that looked ready to collapse. "It's a ruin," someone muttered nearby. "I know. We can't stay here." "We don't have to," I whispered to myself. "Just a pit stop." It was truly an outpost in the void. Nothing but a fuel pump and a weary shack labeled "Rest Stop" in hand-painted letters. We stepped out to move our stiff limbs, and that's when he appeared. A medium-sized mix, patchy brown and white, sporting one alert ear and one that drooped. He was starving ribs pressing against matted fur, scavenging from a bin near the entrance. Josie let out a soft whimper. "Oh, Nora, look at him." I recognized that tone. It had echoed through our years together. Whenever she saw a being weaker than herself, her heart broke. It was too vast for this cruel world, my Josie. That trait was both my favorite thing about her and my greatest source of anxiety. "Josie, no," I started. But she was already approaching him, clicking her tongue softly to signal safety. The mutt lifted his muzzle tail, offering a tentative, rhythmic thump. "Hello," Josie whispered, sinking onto her heels with slow deliberation. "Hi there, buddy. Starving, aren't you?" The animal slunk toward her stomach, grazing the pavement, that tail beating a quicker tempo now. When he finally bridged the gap, he buried his skull into her hand and squeezed his eyes shut, and I witnessed a subtle transformation in his expression. It looked like a profound exhaling, a flicker of memory, like finding a safe harbor. Josie glanced up at me, and the plea was already written in her gaze. "We're barely scraping by as it is," I murmured, though the resistance had already drained from my tone. "He's on his own," Josie stated softly. "Just like us." That settled it. We christened him Biscuit, honoring the only thing we had on hand to offer him, a dry, crumbling cracker I'd been hoarding in my coat pocket. He inhaled it in 2 snaps, polished to Josie's fingers, and gazed up at her with absolute devotion. When we reboarded the coach, Biscuit was part of the package. The driver made a noise about codes and ordinances, but one look at Josie's open face and the dog's soulful stare broke his resolve. "Keep a lid on him," he sighed, waving us through. Biscuit curled into a ball at our ankles and remained comatose all the way to Montana. And just like that, against all logic, our duo became a trio. We rolled into Helena on a Tuesday near the tail end of April. The atmosphere shifted immediately, thinner biting, carrying the perfume of evergreen and high-altitude chill. The peaks loomed over the streets like ancient sentinels, their summits capped in white even as spring claimed the lower elevations. Mr. Caldwell had organized a ride for the final leg to Copper Ridge, a local contact meeting us at the terminal. Gus Brennan was the name, and he wasn't what I'd pictured. A towering figure around 60 with features etched by the elements and hands like cured hide. He stood there in worn plaid and work boots, sporting a brim that had survived decades of abuse. He watched us disembark 2 kids and a scruffy stray dragging our entire lives behind us. His demeanor wasn't exactly warm. "Colton sisters," less a question, more of a statement. "I'm Nora," I said, offering a hand. "This is Josie, and Biscuit." He eyed my palm a beat too long before gripping it, calloused, brief, detached. "Gus Brennan, I hold the parcel next to Ida Mays. Caldwell asked me to haul you up." He squinted, assessing us with a critical eye. "Younger than I figured." 19, I corrected. "She's 16. He grunted, pivoting toward a battered truck idling at the curb. "Let's move. 3-hour haul and I want to beat the sunset." We tossed our gear in the bed and squeezed into the cab, Josie sandwiching the dog between us. Gus fired the ignition without a word, and we rumbled north out of the city. Silence reigned for 60 minutes. The world outside grew steeper, vast valleys turning into timbered slopes, the asphalt snaking through passes that made my ears crackle with pressure. It was a savage kind of gorgeous, intimidating in its scale, not a thing like the concrete grid of Ohio. Gus finally broke the quiet. "You realize the house is gone?" "Yeah." Josie froze. "The letter mentioned a cabin." "Was," Gus corrected. Ida May's shack was barely standing to start. Snow collapsed the roof 2 winters back. She was camping in the ruins when she passed. It's a wreck, uninhabitable. My stomach bottomed out. "So, where do we sleep?" Gus gave a non-committal shrug. "Not my department. Just stating facts." He checked the mirror, then returned his eyes to the center line. "Look, I don't mean to be rough. Ida May was decent folk, kept to herself, but decent. Used to tear her up that she couldn't track you grandkids down, but—" He shook his head. 2 city kids on 47 acres of raw mountain. No shelter, no skills, empty pockets. You'll be retreating to Ohio come July." Josie's grip tightened on my fingers. "We aren't leaving," I said, voice low but steady. Gus caught my eye in the glass. A spark appeared in his expression, skepticism, or perhaps a faint curiosity. He adjusted his shoulders and turned back to the drive. "Have it your way." Copper Ridge barely qualified as a hamlet, just a string of structures clinging to the highway general store feed supply, a church steeple and a diner flashing red booths. Maybe 50 homes tucked into the slopes. And beyond the town, the mountains rose like prison walls, dark with spruce and lingering patches of frost. Gus cruised through without pausing, and I noticed heads turning to track the strangers. In a place this small, news had legs. Our arrival would be dinner table talk by dusk. We climbed for another 20 minutes, asphalt turning to gravel until Gus veered onto a faint rut barely visible through the brush. "Here we are," he muttered. "Colton land." The tires crunched through a grove of shivering aspens before the woods broke open. A vast meadow stretched out, grass hip-high and speckled with early blooms, a creek flashing silver in the late light. Right there amidst every word penned for a stranger she'd never see. She held on to hope. No. Reckon she thought it would actually pan out. I think she valued the attempt. We ought to do the same. Lay the wreckage of Ida Mae's shack. Gus wasn't blowing smoke. The roof had caved in, dragging the walls down into an impossible slant. A gaping door swung loose, exposing the black void inside. The place resembled a carcass, the bleached remains of a dead hope. Beside me, Josie let out a tiny whimper. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, God." I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, tongue-tied. My eyes stayed fixed on the shack while my brain crunched the numbers. $127. 0 employment, 0 trade experience, and no kin beyond the two of us. And this pile of debris was meant to be our sanctuary. The fragile optimism that carried me through a 48-hour bus ride sputtered and nearly died. Suddenly, Biscuit let out a yelp. He'd leaped from the pickup and was tearing through the grass, ears bouncing and tail whipping back and forth. He bolted right past the dilapidated shack, ignoring it completely, and aimed for the eastern boundary where the field crashed into a jagged rock face. "Biscuit!" Josie hollered. "Get back here, boy!" But the pup had already vanished behind a giant slab of stone. We chased after him, Josie leading me close behind and Gus dragging his feet in the rear, clearly not thrilled. Skirting the rock, we shoved our way through a thicket of scrub and froze in our tracks. The cavern. It dwarfed the image I'd built from Ida Mae's writing. The opening spanned roughly 20 feet across and 15 feet high, a shadowy maw in the cliff exhaling a chill into the heat of the day. The ground inside was surprisingly level, dusted with grit and pebbles, while the overhead arch, even from where I stood, I could tell the roof soared well above head height. Morning light, I realized, recalling the letter. Southeast exposure. The dawn would flood the threshold with warmth. Josie crept forward, moving like she was entering a church. She paused at the lip of the cave, pressing her palm against the rock face. Her eyes went round. "It's not damp," she murmured. "Nora, touch it. The rock is bone dry." I moved up and laid a hand next to hers. She wasn't lying. No slickness, no humidity, just chilly, unyielding granite sculpted by currents millennia ago, abandoned when the rivers receded. "Ida Mae used to mention this grotto," Gus grumbled from the rear. His tone had shifted less, brushing us off, more contemplative. Claimed the ancients, the indigenous people wintered here when the weather turned foul. Said the rock holds warmth better than anything man-made. Josie spun to face me, and I caught the spark in her gaze. It mirrored my own gut feeling. This was the place. This was Ida Mae's true legacy. Forget the rotted shack or the pasture. "We can make a life here." Josie breathed, her voice faint. "Seal the front with walls. Lay down flooring at a hearth. We could construct a home right inside the mountain." Gus chuckled, and it wasn't friendly. "Raise a house in a cavern, a couple of gals who've likely never swung a mallet." He wagged his head. "Look, Ida Mae had her head in the clouds, but this is pure fantasy. You need lumber hardware provisions. You need actual expertise. You need—" He threw his hands up. "More than you're bringing to the table." I glanced at my sister. She met my stare, wearing that familiar jagged resolve that had dragged us through 8 years in the system. That silent fortitude that wouldn't shatter no matter how much the world hammered away. "We've got us," Josie said gently. "And we've got this dirt, and a grandmother who trusted we could handle it." She fished the letter from her jeans and hoisted it. "She told us to create something lovely. Said this cave could harbor a kin. She had faith in us, mister. Brennan, I've waited my entire existence for someone to bet on me. I won't fail her." Gus studied her for a long stretch. Then he pivoted to me, and I held his look without blinking. "You're both bonkers," he finally muttered. "Perhaps," I shot back. "But we aren't leaving." He slowly rocked his head, yet I caught a subtle change in his face. Not an endorsement, certainly, but a hint of reluctant admiration for our grit, our refusal to fold before the first hand was played. "Right then," he grunted, turning on his heel toward the pickup. "Don't claim I didn't tell you so. 2 young women erecting a dwelling in a hole in the ground. The entire village will think you've cracked." He wasn't wrong. By Friday, every soul in Copper Ridge was gossiping about the mad Orphan sisters aiming to live inside a cliff, and the laughter was nearly unanimous. Ever had folks mock you for a dream you held dear, something the rest of the world deemed a lost cause? Drop your story in the comments. I want to read about it. Those first 7 days were brutal. Our only cover was a canvas sheet we'd purchased at the mercantile with a slice of our dwindling funds. We lashed it between a pair of oaks near the cavern mouth, rigging up a tada nashini, crude lean-to that deflected the heavy showers but invited the freezing night drafts right in. Josie Biscuit and I clung to each other in the pitch black, our breath puffing out like smoke signals. We survived on cold beans from the tin rock-hard crusts and muddy water scooped straight from the stream. My palms were raw and weeping from swinging that rusted axe we'd salvaged from the wreckage of Ida May's old shack. Josie's spine screamed from dragging heavy stones out of the cavern day in and day out, yet every sunrise saw us doing it all over again. We were flying blind, learning every lesson the hard way. On day 3, I took a crack at bringing down a pine and barely escaped with my life when the trunk twisted and crashed toward me. Josie fared no better with the hearth. Her attempt just filled our lungs with thick gray smoke. We were hopeless greenhorns armed only with grit and a dead woman's letter. Yet we pressed on because turning back simply wasn't on the table. That hollow in the rock became our whole world, the singular reason we dragged our sore bodies out of the blankets at dawn. We waged war on the filth, sweeping out decades of settled grit and loose stones. We smoothed out the ground, hauling river gravel to patch the dips, measuring the space while we dared to imagine a future. Bit by bit, the fog lifted. Josie, always the one with her nose in a book to block out the gray walls of the orphanage, found the answer. That habit of hers turned out to be our salvation. She recalled some dusty volume about indigenous shelters, how the ancients worked with the land rather than fighting it. It's all about trapping the heat, she told me one evening, her face glowing in the dim firelight. Stone regulates itself. It stays constant. It won't bake us in summer, and it won't freeze us in winter. If we seal the front with timber, the rock will do the heavy lifting to keep us warm. So a giant thermos, I said. That got a grin out of her, a real genuine smile, the first I'd seen since we landed in this place. 2 weeks into our stay at Copper Ridge, a figure materialized at the boundary line. I was hacking away at a log when I sensed eyes on me and spotted a stranger lurking by the tree line. She looked to be about 40, her hair a mix of brown and silver. We could have easily died out here. But we didn't because of this land, because we refused to run. You won't leave me, right? Never. She wore her hair in a tight, no-nonsense knot, her face mapped by the wind and sun. Dressed in a plain frock and apron, she approached with a covered basket in hand. "You must be the Colton girl," she called out. "Name's Mabel Harper. My place is a mile east." I dropped the hatchet and wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans. "I'm Nora. Josie is the one over yonder." I pointed toward the cavern mouth where my sister was wrestling with another load of stone. Mabel scanned the grotto, then our sad excuse for a campsite, and finally rested her gaze on me. Her face gave nothing away. "Gus Brennan's been spreading the word," she said. "Says you two aim to put a home inside that rock." Here we go, I thought. I braced myself for the mockery for someone else to call us insane. But Mabel didn't chuckle. She just extended the basket. "I brought you some supper. Thought you might need real food." I stood there dumbfounded. "I knew Ida May," Mabel went on. "She was a decent soul, quiet, kept to herself, but good." Her voice hitched a little when she mentioned the granddaughter. "She'd have wanted you looked after." Josie had emerged from the shadows, now covered in grime and perspiration, standing at my shoulder. She eyed the stranger with the same exhaustion that dragged at my own bones. Life had taught us that free gifts usually came with a heavy price tag. Yet Mabel's gaze held a warmth that echoed Ida May's final letter. It felt real. "Thank you," Josie whispered. "We appreciate it." Mabel gave a sharp nod. "Well, don't let it get cold. Dig in." We perched on log stumps by the fire ring as Mabel revealed the treasure. There was soft bread, sharp cheddar, carved ham, crisp apples, and strawberry jam. It was the finest meal we'd seen since fleeing Ohio. Honestly, it might have been the best meal of our lives. Between bites, Mabel gently quizzed us about the home, the cave, and the letter. Slowly, the tension in my shoulders eased. A strange sensation crept in, something I hadn't felt in ages. Trust. She heard us out without a hint of criticism, sparing us the sneers we'd gotten from the rest of the town. After we laid out our vision, she leaned back, studying the cave's mouth with a calculating look. "It's doable," she murmured. Josie and I looked at each other, stunned. "That rock is sound," Mabel went on. "Good drainage, catches the sun just right." Ida knew what she was doing. She watched this spot for years. She just lacked the muscle to make it happen. She glanced between us and her expression shifted. It looked like approval, maybe even admiration. "You're going to need a hand," she said. "A lot of hands. But if you're truly committed to this, I know folks who can show you the ropes." "We're not going anywhere," I told her, my voice steady. "This place is all we've got." Mabel nodded, slow and solemn. "I'll be back tomorrow with my boy. He's around your age, Nora. Best builder in the county bar none." She collected her things and got up. Just before hitting the tree line, she hesitated and glanced back. "Ida May would be beaming right now," she told us, "at both of you." Then she vanished into the woods. Silence hung between us for a minute. Josie reached out and squeezed my hand. "Guess we aren't doing this alone," she murmured. Come morning, Mabel kept her word. She brought her son, Wyatt Harper, 20 years old, tall and wiry with hair bleached white by the sun and hands roughened by hard labor. He had his mother's gentle eyes but his dad's frame. Mabel mentioned his father passed in a logging wreck 3 years back. The kid didn't say much, just paced the cave, checking the stone, stomping the floor, eyeing the mouth of the cavern with a focus that made me sweat. He was sizing us up, I realized, deciding if we were a waste of effort. Finally, he turned around. "This is insane, you know." I started to protest, but he put a hand up. "Insane," he said again. "But doable?" He pointed at the opening. "You need a frame wall here, floor to roof, 16 feet across, maybe 12 feet high at the apex. Logs are your best bet. Stack them horizontal, notch the corners to lock them in." "We don't know the first thing about notching logs," Josie confessed. A ghost of a smile touched Wyatt's face. "I'll show you." He spent the rest of the daylight teaching us the ropes. How to pick the timber, how to drop a tree without getting killed, stripping bark, curing wood, cutting the joints. It was a lot to take in. Steep learning curve. A million ways to mess up. But Wyatt was steady as a rock. He'd explain it twice, demonstrate, then watch us try. When we fumbled, he fixed it without making us feel small. When we got it right, he just nodded. By dusk, we dropped our first timber together. A 30-foot pine. It hit the dirt with a thud that rang through the hollow. I stood there staring at it, arms shaking from the work, feeling a strange warmth in my chest. Pride. The days bled into one another. May became June, then July. We worked from sunup to sundown, collapsing under the canvas tarp only to wake up and do it all again. The cave started looking like a home. Wyatt was there almost daily. Teaching, sweating, working right alongside us until Mabel whistled him home for dinner. Mabel kept the supplies coming. Food and gear. Blankets, tools, things she swore were just lying around, though I knew she bought them fresh for us. Then other folks started showing up. Diane, Brennan Gus's wife, stopped by one morning with canned goods looking nervous. "Gus has no idea I'm here," she whispered, handing over the basket. "But you two have been on my mind." She did it for Ida May. Then Walter at the hardware store started slashing prices on our orders. "Overstocked inventory," he grumbled, though we all knew that was a polite lie. Even Ruth at the diner, sharp tongue and all, saved us the closing time scraps. "Sin to waste it," she'd say, shoving bags at me. "Besides, you girls look starved." Not everyone was sweet about it. The town still had its gossips, still had its whispers. We felt the eyes at the general store, saw the sneers from men who thought women had no business swinging hammers. But the help drowned out the hate. And slowly, we started believing we might actually pull this off. Then, late in June, the wind shifted. We found the box. Quick question. Ever uncover a secret about a dead loved one that rewrote your whole history? Keep that thought. You might need it later. Biscuit sniffed it out. He was digging near the ruins of the old cabin, his usual cure for boredom while we worked. I walked by and noticed the pit. It was deeper than his usual holes. "Quit it, Biscuit," I called out absently. "You'll break a leg." But when I got close, I saw the wood corner peeking through the dirt. I dropped to my knees, heart hammering. The earth was soft here. Disturbed. Someone had buried this on purpose and tried to blend it in. I scraped the dirt back. "Josie!" My voice cracked. "Josie, get over here." She ran, Wyatt trailing close behind. They found me shaking in the dirt, dusting off the find. A wooden chest, 18 inches square, locked tight. It felt ancient, substantial, and burdened with history. Josie collapsed into the dirt next to me, the color draining from her cheeks. "I'm not certain," I murmured, but someone meant for it to stay concealed. We heaved the trunk free from the ground. The timber was seasoned yet sturdy, preserved by the arid Montana soil. Though corrosion crusted the lock, the mechanism held true. Our gazes locked, a silent communication passing between us. Her hands quivered uncontrollably as she pried the top open. Immediately, the sight of currency greeted us. Stacks of bills lined the container's floor, organized with precision. I grabbed a packet and thumbed through it. $500, I breathed, tallying the piles. Josie, this has to be nearly $4,000. My words fell on deaf ears. Her attention was elsewhere. She had moved the cash aside to fixate on the layer underneath stacks of envelopes. There were scores of them, perhaps hundreds, all directed to Josie Colton at St. Anne's Orphanage in Columbus, Ohio. Every single envelope bore the stamp of a failed delivery. Slowly, she retrieved one from the pile. The paper rattled in her trembling grip. She tried to reach me, she murmured, voice barely audible. She wrote, and they just returned them. Not one had made it through. A sudden, searing heat flared in my gut, pure indignation at the cold administrative machine that had severed this bond. That institution had utterly failed two human beings. Yet the chest held further secrets. Under the correspondence lay a petite leather diary, its cover smoothed by years of touch. Below that, swathed in bleached fabric, sat a collection of snapshots. With distinct tenderness, Josie extracted the images. The top one captured a girl, perhaps 20, possessing the exact same gaze and grin as the woman beside me. The subject stood proudly before a rural homestead. "That's this place," I noted, before time took its toll. "Mom." Josie exhaled. The subsequent picture depicted that same woman, this time cradling an infant with a caption in Ida May's wavering script. "My daughter Rebecca and granddaughter Josie, 6 months of age. The finest day I ever knew." Josie's vision swam with unshed tears. Drops collected on her lashes as she studied these fragments of a history denied to her, a mother barely recalled, a matriarch never met. Then she discovered the last envelope nestled distinctly within the diary's cover set apart from the rest. The inscription was plain, "For Josie upon finding this chest." As she broke the seal, I moved in to scan the lines with her. "My dearest Josie." It started. "If these words reach you, you have uncovered the cache. I always held faith that you would. I placed it in the earth so you might unearth it on your own terms, much like you will uncover the truths of this terrain and your own spirit. The funds represent every cent I set aside across 40 years of solitude. It is no king's ransom, but it will suffice for the supplies required to construct your shelter. Spend it with care. As for the correspondence, oh, child, I penned a note to you weekly for 8 long years, without fail, and each one returned to my door seal broken by no one. Recipient unknown, they claimed. I preserved every single one, unable to commit them to the trash. They served as my sole link to you, however severed that link was. Peruse them if you wish, or leave them be. They are merely the musings of a lonely elder missing her kin, but understand this, you never left my mind. My love for you never wavered, not for a moment. These pictures are my only copies. Your mother was stunning, and she possessed your very laugh. Did anyone tell you that sudden luminous joy that brightens the dark? It visits me in my slumber. This notebook contains all I have gathered regarding this territory, the cavern, and the art of mountain construction. I devoted years to study Josie consulting elders and devouring every text available. I held on to the hope that a successor would utilize this wisdom to create what I could not. I trust that person is you. Raise your sanctuary, my dear. Make it sturdy, cozy, and secure. And once complete, as you rest by the hearth on a freezing evening, recall that your grandmother cherished you. Know that solitude was never truly your fate. Eternally yours, Ida May. We lingered there in silence, the trio of us, amidst a sea of envelopes and snapshots enveloped by 40 years of affection. Josie pressed the portrait of her mother to her heart, eyelids shut tight as silent tears tracked down her face. Biscuit nudged her ribs, letting out a low whine. In that instant, a profound realization washed over me. Our task was not merely constructing a shelter, we were cementing a heritage. We were finalizing a project Ida May initiated 4 decades prior. It was a vision she had nurtured in solitude within this remote wilderness, awaiting a reunion that never occurred in her lifetime. We were bringing her aspiration to life side by side. Her diary transformed into our essential manual. Each night, once our labors ceased, Josie would recite passages from the weathered leaves under the glow of the flames. Ida May had invested years in inquiry learning from locals and indigenous techniques for shelter crafting. She sketched schematics for chimney angles to ensure optimal airflow. She had determined the precise proportions of earth and straw required for the binding paste. She even recorded the correct orientation for the timber to prevent distortion. Her foresight was absolute. One quiet evening, I watched Josie tracing the lines of a doorframe sketch, lost in wonder. It was as if she had constructed this sanctuary in her imagination 1,000 times over, just waiting for the physical world to catch up. She designed this for you, I told her gently, long before she even knew you would arrive. That windfall altered the entire landscape of our lives. $3,800 was not a fortune by city standards, but out here it was everything. It meant legitimate equipment. It meant we could finally afford timber glass and iron hardware. We could stop scavenging and start crafting with intent. We marched into the hardware supply, laying our blueprints out for Walter the proprietor. He studied the papers in silence, his expression unreadable beneath a weathered brow. "We need glazing," I started. "At least 2 panes, and nails, boxes of them, plus door hinges and—" Walter raised a quiet hand to stop me. "I know what you require," he said softly. "I have been keeping an eye on your progress for 2 months. I know exactly what the job calls for." He vanished into the stockroom and returned with a tally sheet penned in meticulous script. "It is all right here," he promised. "I will price this fairly with a bit taken off the top. Ida May was a good soul, and you are honoring her memory well." He cleared his throat, his voice dropping to a rumble. "You represent the main topic of conversation in this town. Half the folks think you have lost your senses." He offered a small shrug. "The other half, they are beginning to suspect you might be geniuses." July dissolved into a blur of labor. We toiled from the first gray light of morning until the sun dipped below the horizon, pausing only for sustenance and sleep. The structure rose timber by timber, every log notched and seated with a confidence we were only just learning. Wyatt was a fixture there, a quiet guide correcting our angles and shouldering the burdens that were simply too heavy for Josie and me. We set the panes real glass, fragile and costly, and hung a door of solid oak swinging on iron hinges with a heavy latch. Smooth planks covered the rough stone ground, leveling our world. Then we turned our attention to the hearth. This was the linchpin, the beating heart of the entire project. We needed a stone chimney nestled against the cave wall designed to funnel smoke through a precise gap between our roof and the cavern ceiling. There was no margin for error. If the draw failed, the cabin would be uninhabitable. We relied on Ida May's detailed notes and the childhood memories of Wyatt, whose father had been a mason. Wyatt summoned that old knowledge, showing us how to choose the stones. He taught us to fit the jagged pieces with clay mortar and how to slope the firebox to ensure a clean draft. The task consumed a fortnight. 14 days of dragging river stones and mixing mud until our palms were split and raw. It was a season of failures and teardowns, of dismantling our work whenever the geometry felt wrong, but eventually the hearth stood finished. Wyatt claimed the honor of the first burn, kneeling with a match and a bundle of dry twigs. Fire took hold, and the smoke, rather than choking the room, drifted upward in a perfect column, escaping into the twilight. "It is actually drawing," Josie breathed, her eyes reflecting the fresh glow. My vision blurred. It was a mix of exhaustion and sheer relief, but the reality settled in. We had a hearth, a true fireplace. It made it a true home. By the time August arrived, the shell was finished. The cabin nestled within the stone maw, a wooden jewel box that looked like something plucked from a storybook. With its pitched roof and sun-catching windows, it seemed fragile, yet the massive cave walls loomed behind it like a protective embrace. It was an odd, enchanting sight, unlike any architecture I had ever encountered. Best of all, it belonged to us. That was when Gus Brennan decided to pay a visit. We hadn't exchanged a word since he dropped us off from Helena, though whispers suggested he had been tracking our survival with growing bewilderment. He lingered at the threshold for a long while, staring. "Well, I will be damned," he finally muttered. I joined him at the entrance, searching for the right words. This was the predictor of our doom, the man who gave us mere days before we would flee back to Ohio. "Would you like a tour?" I offered. He gave a slow nod and stepped across the threshold. The inside was unfinished, certainly. We lacked furniture and the loft was bare, but the soul of the place was present: solid floors, stout walls, the stone hearth and the golden light pouring in, and the air. I saw the moment it hit him. He halted in the center of the room, a confused furrow on his brow. "It is pleasant in here," he noted. "The cavern regulates the climate," Josie called down from the loft framing. "It stays near 55 degrees, nature's air conditioning. Come winter, the stone retains the hearth's heat. We do not fight the elements here. We simply nudge the temperature up a few degrees." Gus approached the chimney, resting his palm against the masonry. Then he moved to the raw stone of the cavern wall that served as our backdrop. 55 degrees, he murmured, verifying the old wisdom, just like the book promised. At least that was the story according to local lore. Gus fell silent for a long stretch. When he finally pivoted to look at us, his demeanor had shifted entirely. The doubt hadn't vanished completely, but a new light had entered his eyes. Acknowledgement. I may have misjudged you girls. He admitted, his words measured and slow. My own place, the one my granddad put up, burns through 4 or 5 logs every single hour just to keep the frostbite off. Even then, the wind cuts right through the chinking. Come January, my windows are iced over on the inside. He scanned the rock walls again, seeing them with fresh eyes. This is viable, he murmured. This could actually work. It was the first time a soul from the village had offered us such validation. And coming from Gus Brennan, the very man who had mocked us, who called us dreamers, it was a monumental victory. But tranquility is a fragile thing. By the second week of August, an intruder arrived in Copper Ridge. Let me stop for a moment and put a question to you. Have you ever felt someone reaching out to steal what is yours? Not just an object, but something you earned through sweat and sacrifice. If you have, you recognize the sensation. That heavy, cold stone in the gut. The shock that humanity can be so callous. Keep that feeling close. You will need it to understand what happens next. If you are still walking this path with us, please hit that subscribe button. We are approaching the turning point. The man's name was Raymond Finch. He rolled into town on a Tuesday afternoon, piloting a luxury sedan that looked absurdly fragile against our rough, dusty mountain tracks. He appeared to be about 50 years old, draped in fine tailoring, wearing a practiced smile that never reached his freezing eyes. He marched straight into the general store, demanding answers about Ida. He asked about the Colton estate and about the 2 young women currently occupying it. The intel reached me via Ruth at the diner, who got it from Walter at the hardware supply, who had heard it from half the town already. In a place like Copper Ridge, silence is rare, and gossip about outsiders moves faster than the wind. Who is he? I asked, Ruth, dread already pooling in my chest. Claims he is Ida May's nephew. Says he only just learned of her passing and is here to collect his inheritance. His inheritance. The air left my lungs as if I'd been struck. But the testament, Mr. Caldwell assured us, everything went to Josie. Ruth gave a helpless shrug, concern etching her face. That is his angle. He claims the will is invalid. Says he is the true blood heir. I sprinted the entire distance back to the property, my thoughts spiraling. This was impossible. We held the legal papers. We possessed Ida May's handwritten wishes. We had Mr. Caldwell's stamped documents. It was all above board. It had to be. I found Josie working in the sleeping loft. She took one look at my expression and the color drained from her skin instantly. What is it? I told her everything, watching the light die in her eyes, replaced by terror. He can't, she breathed. He can't simply take it. Ida gave it to us. I know, I said, pacing the floor, too agitated to stand still. But he has resources, lawyers, wealth. He is already planting seeds of doubt in town. We didn't sleep a wink that night. We sat before our hearth, the fire we built in the home we made, desperately plotting a defense. Raymond Finch appeared at our threshold the following morning. His polished vehicle crept up the drive, and he exited languidly, surveying the wildflowers, the peaks, and the cavern dwelling inside the cliff. His gaze was that of an appraiser calculating value. I stepped out to confront him, with Josie right at my shoulder. Biscuit let out a low, warning rumble. Miss Colton, I assume, Finch stated, turning that oily smile toward Josie. I am Raymond Finch, your great-uncle, the son of your grandmother's brother. Ida May had no brother, Josie countered. Her voice was steady, though I detected the vibration of fear beneath it. Finch's grin remained plaster-fixed. I am afraid you have been misinformed. She had an elder sibling, my father. He departed Montana before she was old enough to retain the memory. Family rifts are tragic, you see. He gestured vaguely. But blood remains blood. As Ida May's nearest male kin, the estate naturally reverts to me. We have a testament, I interjected, a lawful will. She left everything to Josie. Ah, yes, the will. Finch's expression shifted to faux sympathy. My legal team has reviewed the situation. They have significant doubts regarding its legitimacy. Mrs. Colton was advanced in years and isolated when she drafted it. No proper impartial witnesses were present. These details matter in court. Mr. Caldwell signed it, I argued. He is an attorney. A village lawyer with a personal bias toward the deceased, Finch corrected. Hardly a neutral party. He scanned the cave again, his eyes lingering on the stonework. I am prepared to be charitable. Vacate without a fuss, and I will not press charges for squatting. I will even provide— He paused, doing a mock calculation. $500 for your trouble. $500 for 4 months of sweating over Ida May's fantasy. For our entire existence here. No, Josie said. Finch's eyes tightened. Excuse me. Josie took a step toward him, her slight body stiffening with resolve. This earth belonged to my grandmother. She entrusted it to me. I have her correspondence, hundreds of letters proving she knew exactly who I was and what she wanted. I have her journal. I have her will. And I am not going anywhere. For a split second, a dark malice broke through Finch's polished mask. Then it vanished, covered once more by that patronizing smirk. I understand. It is unfortunate that you are taking this stance, but a judge will have to make the final call. He pivoted toward his sedan but stopped short. 90 days. Be gone by then, or I will have law enforcement drag you out. He peeled out of the driveway, leaving us choking in a thick haze of dirt. Josie couldn't stop shaking. I pulled her close, anchoring her against my side. We aren't going anywhere, I promised. The man is a fraud, Joe. He has to be. Ida May was an only child. Her will is rock solid. We just need to show the world. Josie's voice broke. But how? We can't afford a defense. We have zero evidence. We are empty-handed. She couldn't have been more wrong. We possessed a weapon. He hadn't calculated neighbors who were finally rallying to our side. The following weeks dissolved into a blur of panic and planning. Caldwell drove up the morning after the confrontation wearing a look that promised bad news. Rumors of the interloper had reached him, and he wanted to settle our nerves. That document holds up, he insisted. I stood right there when she signed it. Her mind was sharp as a tack. She made her choices clearly. I cut in. Does that stop him from suing? Caldwell paused. Any fool can file paperwork. He gestured vaguely. Winning is another story. Likely not, but I won't lie. Finch has deep pockets and city attorneys. Sometimes local justice bends to the highest bidder. Tell us what to get, Josie demanded. How do we expose him? Documentation showing Ida May was solo. Birth certificates, old correspondence, anything that contradicts Finch's identity. We did have her correspondence, stacks of it. We pored over the papers for 3 days, hunting for a whisper of a sibling. We struck gold on day 2. In a note from October 1947, Ida May reminisced about her youth on this soil, specifically mentioning her solitary upbringing. The sole baby my mother could carry despite her prayers for a full house. There it is. Josie gripped the paper. She had no brother. He is a fraud. However, Caldwell wasn't convinced. He frowned at the page. It supports the case certainly, but it is not a smoking gun. He might argue half-siblings or secret adoptions. We need ironclad proof. That is when Gus Brennan stepped up. Gus stormed onto the porch a week later, looking ready for a fight. The guy is a snake, he announced. My gut told me he was off, so I dug around. How so? I asked. Gus produced a creased clipping. Got a cousin up in Billings who runs the press. Had him run a background check on our friend Raymond. He smoothed out the page and passed it over. The date was 2 years old, but the headline froze my marrow, Grifter sentenced in a state fraud scheme. It detailed how this exact Raymond Finch was nailed for attempting to swindle a grieving family out of their ranch. His toolkit included fake papers, made-up relatives, and abusing the legal process. He had done 18 months inside. It is his standard operation, I whispered. Career criminal, Gus agreed. Prison didn't fix him. He is running the exact same play on you two. Josie and I locked eyes. The terror finally receded, replaced by a new sensation, hope. Then Wyatt brought the hammer down with the final nail in the coffin. He made the 6-hour haul to the Billings courthouse where the conviction happened. After scouring the archives, he found the smoking gun a wanted notice. Finch had breached his release conditions. He was restricted to city limits and banned from any estate-related activities. The man was on the run. Wyatt raced back to Copper Ridge, and we marched that intel right to the station. 3 days later, it all went down. Sheriff Tom Weathers, a man who moved with quiet purpose, headed for Finch's rental. We showed up to watch, joined by half the population. The secret was out, and the town knew a predator was in their midst. Raymond Finch? Weathers called out, his baritone cutting through the silence. You are being detained for parole violation and attempted fraud. Finch's polished mask shattered. He stammered, tried to spin a yarn like he always did, but the charm offensive failed. Weathers clicked the cuffs onto his wrists. The crowd watched without a word. My Josie, once paralyzed by the threat of ruin, stood like a statue of resolve, head high and eyes clear. My grandmother carved a life out of this dirt, she announced to the gathering. She cherished this place. This place held her heart just as I did, even though our paths never crossed in life. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. We aren't going anywhere. We belong here, and we're seeing her vision through to the end. Once Finch was out of the picture, the atmosphere in Copper Ridge changed completely. Folks who used to mock us, call us insane, or gossip in the shadows began stepping up one by one, extending a hand. There's a stack of timber gathering dust in my barn, a local farmer offered. Take it, it's yours, and I can lend a hand with the shingles, another added. I've laid plenty of roofs in my day. My wife makes the finest chicken and dumplings in the county. I'll ask her to run a batch over. It was almost too much to take in. Following months of hardship and weeks living in dread, we were suddenly embraced by a crowd eager to support us, folks who believed in our mission and treated us like kin. It makes you wonder, have you ever experienced a whole town rallying around you in your darkest hour? Such acts of grace are scarce and invaluable. If that hasn't happened for you yet, I pray it does one day. Everyone deserves to feel that sense of belonging. October arrived in Montana, painted in brilliant gold. The hillsides were set ablaze as the aspens shifted to yellow, then deep orange before shedding their leaves in rustling drifts. A chill settled in the air, whispering of the winter waiting in the wings. Snow began to crown the peaks, creeping lower with every passing week, just as our sanctuary reached completion. I can still picture the second we finished the final chore. On a Tuesday afternoon, we were mounting the finishing touch, a timber sign Wyatt had carved by hand to hang over the entryway. It bore the name Colton House, followed by Esther, 1952. Josie stood atop the ladder, driving home the final nail. I waited on the ground, bracing the legs and watching her work. Biscuit rested near my boots, his tail thumping against the dirt. The hammer made its last solid thud. It held fast. Josie made her way down carefully, and we stood side by side admiring what we had made. The structure nestled perfectly into the cavern's maw, where timber met bedrock, blending the constructed and the wild into a singular entity. Sunlight danced off the glass in the crisp autumn air. The chimney stood tall, prepared to carry away the smoke of countless hearth fires to come. The front door looked sturdy and inviting, while the inscription overhead proclaimed our identity and our achievement to anyone who passed. We actually pulled it off, Josie murmured. Yeah, we did, I echoed. When she looked at me, her eyes were swimming with tears of joy and relief. And I honestly didn't think... She trailed off, unable to finish. I know, I replied. I had my doubts too. We wrapped our arms around each other right on the doorstep while Biscuit yipped and zoomed around our legs. When we finally let go, we were caught somewhere between laughter and sobbing. We kindled the inaugural fire in our finished sanctuary that very evening. The wood took the spark, instantly snapping and popping within the stone hearth. A warm golden glow saturated the room, throwing dancing shadows against the timber, while the heat, that glorious life-saving heat, radiated through the snug space like a living presence. By the flicker of the flames, Josie read aloud from Ida Mae's diary. It wasn't the message that led us here, but a different passage, one of many she had penned over the decades. She wrote of the cavern, of her aspirations for it, and the sanctuary she longed to construct. The cave is a blessing, Josie recited gently, a gift from the land. It provides cover heat and safety. All it requires is reverence and the bravery to recognize what it can be. My prayer is that one day a kindred spirit finds that courage. I hope someone brings my vision to life. She set the book down and met my gaze. We did it, Nora. We made it real. I just nodded, the lump in my throat stealing my voice. Beyond the walls, the October breeze began to howl, carrying the initial warnings of the freeze. Yet within our stone and timber refuge, bathed in firelight, we were toasty. We were secure. We were finally home. November ushered in the first heavy snows. The flakes descended for 3 consecutive days, draping the meadow in white, drifting high against the cavern mouth and turning the landscape into a quiet alien world. We hunkered down, tending the hearth-devouring novels, and shuffling cards under the soft glow of candles, remaining perfectly toasty. The cave functioned just as Ida Mae had foreseen. The rock face held a steady baseline warmth, and the fire bumped it up to a cozy degree. We burned barely half the cordwood a standard cabin would need, perhaps even less. The warmth hung in the air long after the embers faded, absorbed by the rock and gently radiated back throughout the night. "It's amazing," Josie remarked the next morning, waking up to a comfortable room even though the fire was practically dead. "The rock is still throwing off heat." "Exactly as you calculated," I replied, thinking back to our initial scheming. Ida May had been spot on about every detail. News of our cozy dwelling made the rounds in Copper Ridge. Folks stopped by, kicking snow off their boots, cheeks flushed from the freeze only to pause in awe when the interior warmth hit them. "How on earth are you doing this?" a neighbor asked, stretching his palms toward the grate. "My place is an icebox with a fire double this size." "It's the cave," Josie explained with a grin. "Rock acts like a thermal battery, and this enclosure prevents that energy from escaping. The flames aren't fighting a losing battle against the frost, they're just topping off the warmth that's already here." The farmer scanned the room, deep in thought. "Funny thing," he murmured. "I've got a cavern back on my land. Nothing as grand as this, mind you. Its tighter doesn't go as deep, but it makes a man think." Winter settled in, bringing the holidays with it. We kept to our shelter. It was just Josie the dog and me, plus the Harpers, Mabel, and Wyatt, who felt like kin after all the months we spent hauling stone together. Dottie Brennan stopped by as well, bearing a glazed ham and excuses from Gus. The old man was too stubborn to visit, but he sent a peace offering, a handcrafted timber chest. We dressed up a scrub pine with whatever scraps we had, bits of ribbon and garlands of dried berries. The new stove handled the Christmas feast perfectly. We swapped presents, nothing flashy, just simple things that carried weight. Once the plates were cleared and the candle wax was dripping low, Mabel stood up with her drink. "Here's to Ida May," she said softly, "the woman who dreamed big for the lot of us." We raised our cups to her memory, to our friendship, and to the sanctuary that bound us. Then the calendar turned to January, and the world tilted. The weather broke on the 15th. It began innocently enough, just a few stray flakes tumbling from a leaden sky. Standard fare for a Montana winter. I spotted it while hauling in the evening logs, but paid it no mind. We were used to powder. We knew the drill, but by midday the snow was coming down in sheets. By dusk it was a full-blown whiteout. The wind shrieked down from the peaks, blasting the snow sideways. The mercury plummeted 20-30, finally 40 degrees below zero. Outside, the landscape vanished into a howling white void. Inside the rock walls, we were secure with our timber stacks. The larder was full cured meats, jars of summer vegetables, preserved fruit. The water drums were topped off from the creek. We were ready for a rough patch. But this wasn't just a rough patch. It was the kind of deep freeze old-timers hadn't seen in 30 years. 24 hours passed. Then 48. The gale showed no mercy. We fed the stove around the clock, now tossing in split logs every hour to keep the chill at bay. The cave did its part. Even if we let the embers die down, we wouldn't freeze, but we weren't gambling. Not with that wind, not with that kind of cold. Biscuit refused to leave the hearth, only dashing outside when nature absolutely demanded it. Josie and I rotated shifts through the night to ensure the fire never sputtered out. On the third day, a heavy thud hit the door. I figured my mind was playing tricks. The gale was roaring so hard it masked every other noise. Could have been a falling limb or snapping ice. Just the storm messing with me. But the dog heard it too. He went berserk, barking and scrabbling at the entryway. My pulse spiked as I followed him. When I cracked the latch, the wind nearly put me on my back. Ice grit swirled into the room, scouring my skin like sandpaper. Through the white haze, two shapes emerged, Gus and Dottie Brennan. They were barely standing. Gus was holding her up with one arm, his other fist raised to pound again. They were ghastly pale eyebrows frosted over with ice. Dottie was trying to form words, but nothing came out. I grabbed their coats and hauled them into the warmth, forcing the door shut against the blast. "Stoke it up," I yelled to Josie. "Grab every quilt we own. More wood." We scrambled, peeling off their ice-stiffened layers and swaddling them by the stove. Gus was vibrating with tremors. Dottie looked right through us, eyes glazed. Hypothermia. I remembered the symptoms from one of the medical guides Josie kept. The system fails. The core goes cold. It kills fast if you don't act. We warmed them gently, just like the book advised. Heated bottles wrapped in cloth against their chests. Tepid sips of water once they could swallow. We rubbed their limbs to get the blood moving. It was an hour before Dottie could whisper. 2 before the violent shivering subsided. 3 hours passed before they could explain. "The roof caved in," Gus rasped, his voice wrecked. 2 in the morning. The snow load was too heavy. Snap the timbers, half the house is gone. The look he gave me was haunting something I'd never seen in him. It was terror mixed with humiliation. We were done for, he confessed. Out in that white, we were dead. Town was impossible. This was the only place we could reach. He stopped, choking back emotion. I mocked you when you started this, he admitted. When you dug into the rock, I called you a fool. I swore you'd wash out. I didn't. He couldn't finish, just shook his head. You saved us, Gus whispered. This hole in the ground kept us alive. The blizzard raged for another 2 days, and the guests kept coming. The Harrisons showed up after their north wall buckled. The Olsons arrived when their chimney collapsed and smoked them out. By the end, we sheltered 3 families, 14 souls huddled together in the one place that held strong against the winter. That burrow was packed tight. Just a 2-person dwelling stuffed with 14 souls and a pair of hounds. We rotated sleeping spots, cramming 3 or 4 bodies onto a single mattress while measuring out every crumb of bread and feeding the hearth around the clock. Yet nobody shivered. We all made it through. The cavern performed precisely the way Ida predicted it would. Rock absorbed the warmth while the earth shielded us from the gale, turning our tight quarters into a reservoir of heat. Between the combined radiance of 14 living bodies and the flickering hearth, the mercury held steady above 50 degrees. Beyond the door, the world had plunged to 40 below a freeze so deep it caused the timber to shatter. Livestock turned to statues in the fields, while in our dugout, kids shuffled decks in the glow of the embers, and Mrs. Harrison showed Josie the rhythm of the knitting needles. When the tempest finally lifted on day 5, we stepped out into an alien landscape. Drifts towered 15 feet high, sculpted into surreal white monuments by the relentless gusts. Above, the azure burned our eyes after the long darkness hanging over a profound stillness. Then we noticed the chimneys, or rather the absence of their signals. Usually, a Montana freeze meant looking out over the basin to catch gray wisps spiraling from 12 different hearths. Those were the markers of life, proofs of endurance. But that dawn, only 2 thin columns rose against the sky. Just our vent and a solitary neighbor miles away. Dottie let out a soft, prayerful gasp. For 3 days, we shoveled paths and checked on friends, tallying the devastation. The blizzard had claimed 4 souls, including Mr. Perkins, a hermit on the outskirts, the 6-month-old Johnson infant, and a pair of strangers trapped on the highway. 8 houses lay in ruin, crushed by the weight of the snow, or blown open by the wind, their masonry crumbled. Lineages deeply rooted in Copper Ridge were left without shelter. Meanwhile, a single topic dominated every conversation: the burrow. Hold on a second, this part matters. Often the oddities that draw ridicule, the ideas that seem utterly madness, end up being our salvation. Tragedy has a way of clarifying what was always real. Have you felt that shift? That instant of vindication when your solitary faith is finally proven right? I'd be keen to hear it. Anyway, the community gathered a fortnight post-storm. The whole of Copper Ridge squeezed into the chapel, the only structure left with the square footage to host us. The air was heavy with grief. With 4 gone and 8 homesteads flattened, we were a people on the brink. Then Gus Brennan rose. It caught me off guard. Nobody expected words from him. He wasn't the type for oratory. He was a laborer, a silent man who let his work do the talking. Yet, there he was facing the town with raw honesty. I'm only breathing today because of them, he declared, gesturing to us in the rear pews. Same goes for my missus. When the beams gave way and the cold came for us during that hellish whiteout, they opened that dugout door. The very place I mocked. The place I called insanity. It kept us alive. He scanned the faces in the crowd. Kept the Harrisons and the Olsons going, too. 14 souls are still here because a pair of orphans were brave enough to break the mold. He looked straight at Josie, his composure fracturing. I apologize, he choked out, for the doubt, for the jokes. Ida May had the right of it, and I was the fool. A hush fell over the hall until Josie stood. She looked diminutive, 16, hardly 5 feet, with that perpetual flinch of a kid used to dodging life's backhand. Yet her tone rang out steady and sure. My gran envisioned a sanctuary in that hill, she stated. She trusted it to shield her kin from the cruelest frosts. She poured years into that study-filling notebooks, praying someone might eventually be brave enough to attempt it. She met the gaze. Every neighbor, Nora and I, we were just trying to stay alive. We had no guarantees. But we knew inaction wasn't an option. And now, she steadied herself, now we want to help you do the same. These hills are full of hollows, perfect spots for dwellings. We hold all her data, every lesson she recorded about earth-sheltered living. If you want the knowledge, it's yours. The church exploded with noise. Questions flew and schemes were hatched on the spot. Before the hour was up, 10 households signed on to the idea. A week later, we'd pegged 8 viable locations. Come the thaw, fresh earth homes were emerging from the slopes surrounding the town. It kicked off an era of construction. Season after season, we labored beside our friends, passing down the wisdom Ida May left in those pages. We improvised, tackled unforeseen hurdles, and refined methods that outperformed our wildest hopes. Wyatt was a fixture in our daily lives, showing up ready to work almost every morning. The man had an innate understanding of structure, a knack for seeing how the pieces of a puzzle fit before he even touched them. I can't pinpoint the exact moment things shifted, but eventually it hit me that I was losing my heart to him. It wasn't a lightning strike. It was a slow dawn, a lingering look here, a spark at his touch there, the way my name sounded like a benediction on his lips. We exchanged vows in the spring of 1954 at the little chapel in town, with Josie standing right beside me as my witness. Our old dog Biscuit trotted down the aisle with the ring secured to his collar while Josie began carving out her own future. She had always possessed a teacher's spirit, going back to the days she read stories to the little ones at the group home. She turned our main room into a makeshift classroom, giving the local kids a place to learn their letters and expand their horizons. By 1958, she had settled down with Samuel, a quiet educator from Billings who came for the architecture but stayed for the girl. They raised a son, Thomas, and a daughter named May, honoring the woman who gave us our start. Her little classroom did not stay little for long. What began as lessons by the hearth evolved into a real schoolhouse dug halfway into the slope, just like our homes. Students traveled from all over just to sit under the tutelage of the woman who helped put this town on the map. The underground living concept caught on like wildfire, spreading well beyond our ridge to the neighboring communities. Curious folks flocked here to study our methods and take those blueprints back to their own lives. Whenever anyone asked for the origin story, we pointed them to Ida May Colton, the grandmother whose vision was vast enough to shelter us all. 20 years after we first set foot in Montana, a reporter showed up in Copper Ridge. She was a city writer chasing a feature on avant-garde rural architecture. She had caught wind of our subterranean houses and wanted a first-hand look. I was pushing 39 by then. I had 3 babies with Wyatt hands calloused from labor and the first streaks of silver in my hair. Yet, guiding her through the first home Josie and I carved out back in 1952, the pride swelled in my chest just as fresh as it had been back then. What possessed you to dig into the rock? She sat with her pen hovering over the page. I debated giving her the technical spiel. I could have talked about insulation or survival, but I decided to give her the heart of the matter. Josie's grandmother, Ida May Colton, I told her. We never knew her, but she loved us enough to leave us this earth to build on. I hesitated, letting the gratitude wash over me. Somewhere down the line, she became my grandmother too. That is the thing about family, it stretches to make room for anyone who belongs. I scanned the timber beams, and the rock faced the hearth that had kept the cold at bay for so many winters. She knew what she was doing, I said. Later that night, after the reporter had gone, Josie dropped by. She was 36 now, a mother herself, and revered as the finest educator the county had ever seen. But sitting there in the old place, now practically a museum piece, she looked for all the world like that frightened 16-year-old from Ohio. Biscuit's grand pup, a patchy mutt, the spitting image of his forebear, snoozed on the rug. "Do you think she has any idea?" Josie whispered. "Ida May. Does she know what came of her gift?" I mulled it over. I suspect she knew before we ever lifted a shovel. She must have looked at 2 desperate girls with empty pockets and seen the potential. I waved a hand at the walls and the village outside. She envisioned all of this. Josie rested her head on my shoulder. "I miss her. Weird, isn't it, since we never met? I only know her face from pictures, yet the ache is there daily." "It is not weird at all," I assured her. "Love doesn't need a handshake to be real." We watched the embers glow in silence. "She had good instincts about another thing," Josie murmured after a beat. "What is that?" Josie's eyes were glassy with emotion. She was dead right about you, Nora. When she wrote that you had to come with me, that you were kin." Her voice cracked. "You are. You always were. Not by genetics, but by decision. And that kind of bond is stronger than biology." I squeezed her tight, a familiar embrace I had given her countless times over the years. Through the orphanage dark, the long roads, and the storms. "We built something beautiful," I whispered against her hair, just like she knew we would. Josie pulled away, swiping at her wet cheeks, a smile breaking through the tears. "We made something bigger than just a shelter," she whispered. "We forged a sanctuary, a true refuge for us and every soul that followed." Beyond the glass, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the valley. I watched chimney smoke drift up from over 20 dugouts now. You could feel the village settling down, hear mothers calling their little ones in for dinner. The peaks stood silhouetted against a sky burning with fading violet and gold. Biscuit's grandson shifted at our feet, sighed heavily, and drifted back into dreams. "You know which moment sticks with me?" Josie asked quietly. "That terrifying ride on the bus. I was shaking so hard I couldn't close my eyes until you grabbed my hand and promised we'd make it." The memory was vivid. "I remember," I said. "Truth is, I had no idea if we'd be okay. I only knew we weren't alone." "And that," Josie said, giving my hand that familiar squeeze, the same anchor after all these years, "was all we ever needed." She was right. It was everything. We remained still as the twilight deepened and the first stars pricked the sky. Just two women, bound not by genetics but by every single thing that actually matters. Sitting in the gloat of the life we'd carved from the earth, I finally grasped what Ida May had known all along. Kinship isn't about blood. Family isn't defined by a birth certificate. And home. It's not a destination you stumble upon. It is a structure you raise. You lay it stone by stone, timber by timber, through shared acts of bravery. If this journey moved you, please subscribe to the channel. Pass this along to a friend who needs a little light, and drop a comment below about your chosen tribe, the ones who stood tall when you were small. Your testimony might be the exact lifeline a stranger is searching for right now. Until we meet again. While some inherit a warm hearth, others have to walk through the cold to learn what warmth really means. This tale is a testament that family isn't always a birthright. Often, it is a deliberate decision. Nora and Josie share no common ancestors, yet their connection runs deeper than marrow. They weathered the darkest hours together, split the last crumb of bread, and held the line when society looked away. That isn't paperwork, that is devotion. Home works the same way. It doesn't manifest out of thin air, a pristine cottage waiting for a key. Sometimes home starts as a wreck, a drafty shelter, a damp cave, and a trembling question in the dark. Can I really begin again? We assume hope requires resources, wealth, a safety net, a resume. Yet these two women prove that hope can ignite from the humblest sparks. A handwritten note, a stubborn refusal to separate a lost dog seeking safety, and the sheer grit to defy your history. The true treasure here isn't the cave itself, but the alchemy of turning poverty into power. They didn't beg for handouts. They learned to swing hammers to calculate angles to fix what they broke. Every callus on their palms, every sleepless stormy night, every time they stood up after falling, these were the mortar of their self-worth. When you mold cold earth into a warm shelter with your own 10 fingers, you aren't just building walls. You are reconstructing your own spirit, making it tougher, quieter, and unshakable. There is a deeper lesson here, too. The very things people mock might be the things that save you. Being the odd one out, being mad enough to walk the untraveled road that is often where the future hides. But walking that road requires the stomach to be misunderstood and the will to march on when the crowd is silent. If you are starting from zero, know this: zero isn't the end. It is the foundation where you can build anything you dream of. Stick with the people who don't run when the storm hits. Value the hand that pulls you up from the dirt. And remember, don't go looking for a home to buy. Build one. Day by day. Act by act. Because in the end, home is not where you live, but where you create. It with love, with intent, and with the courage to never quit.